Hello and good evening, everyone. I would like to, my name is Quandra Spates, and my guest today is Paul Pearson. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this show that's presented to you by Help One Save One. Help One Save One is a community-inspired organization. As you can see, our email address is helponesaveone@hotmail.com. Telephone number is 312-313-6977. You can always follow us on Help One Save One on Facebook. Our objectives here at Help One Save One is to enlighten and inform the community. We bring topics to the community that are designed to educate and enlighten. As you can see, you can call in. This CAN TV is an interactive show. You can call in at 312-738-1060. Once again, that's 312-738-1060. Please do call in. We encourage you all to call in. Last week we recapped the show by just going over the current commission reports and over the several topics we've discussed over the last 12 weeks here at CAN TV. As mentioned in previous shows, the current commission report has been our foundation to support topics we have been discussing over the last 12 weeks. It has been our intent to create a progressive series of informative discussions regarding our journey as African Americans, people examining where we once were, where we wanted to be in the past versus where we are today. My guest, as I mentioned earlier a few minutes ago, is Paul Pearson. Paul has an amazing background with dealing with today's youth and many of the challenges that these young African American young women and men face. I would like to take this opportunity to read his bio and share his bio with our viewers. So as an advocate, Paul's purpose is tied to cultural, competent, community-based, and holistic restorative practice. In the field of juvenile justice, his passion is to serve marginalized, underserved, under-resourced, undereducated youth is near and dear to his heart due to his personal experience growing up in the Washington Park housing projects on Chicago's South Side, where he saw many of his family members, peers, and finally the children of the same become entangled within what many describe today as the school-to-prison pipeline. Paul himself ended up dropping out of high school at the age of 17. However, in 2013, he relocated back to Chicago and took another leap of faith and decided to take his GED. Since then, Paul went on to receive a joint degree where he graduated from DePaul University with a Bachelor's of Arts with a focus on computer science and information systems. His desire is to better serve. Right now Paul is a candidate for a Master's of Jurisprudence with a focus on public interest law, juvenile justice at the College of Law, DePaul University. His current undertaking forgoes many paid leadership roles, career opportunities, and is superseded by his willingness to give a voice to those who are voiceless and to serve our impoverished youth community members without expectation. Paul is a believer in a holistic approach to addressing concerns with behavioral outcomes for our marginalized inner city youth. And I just want to talk a little bit about your youth program, which focuses on all volunteer youth program known as DuSable Community Coalition. As a founder, Paul works tirelessly to connect servant leadership practitioners with culturally competent restorative justice practices to our youth at the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, which to understand the realities of the JTDC staff and administration as we work in partnership. Wow, that was a mouthful. I probably should have had a bottle of water. But that is really amazing, Paul. I'm very happy that you decided to come on our show today. But with that, I just want to talk a little bit about the Kerner Commission report, because as you know, this show is based off of that. So 50 years ago, the infamous Kerner Commission report found that poverty and institutional racism were driving inner city violence. The report declared that pent-up frustrations boiled over in many African American communities during the mid to late 1960s, setting off riots that rampaged out of control from block to block. Many Americans blame the riots on outside agitators as well as young black men, who represent the largest and most visible group of the rioters. But in March 1968, the Kerner Commissioner report turned those assumptions upside down, declaring white racism, not black anger, turned the key that unlocked urban American turmoil. It went on to state that bad police practices, a flawed justice system, unscrupulous consumer credit practices, poor or inadequate housing, health unemployment, voter suppression, and other culturally embedded forms of racial discrimination all converge to propel violent upheaval of the streets of African American neighborhoods in American cities, north, south, east, and west, all over America. So, with that, I wanted to turn it over to you just to give you a foundation on where we are with that Kerner Commission report. And so the name of the program is called Sankofa Rites of Passage. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So why that name?
Well, first of all, thank you, Quantra, for inviting me out to share this conversation and to share some insight and perspectives with our audience here. With that being said, Sankofa Rites of Passage. Sankofa is an African proverb, and essentially in one word, the summation is to remember. Remember who you are, remember where you come from, and remember the realities of the racial disparities here in the city of Chicago and throughout the United States, if in fact not throughout the world. The Rites of Passage is to give our young people an opportunity to experience culturally who they are as a people. Research has shown that if a young person has value in who they are and know who they are and where they come from, they actually transfer that value of self into the value of others and their communities. Quite often, we hear about youth being called super predators or violent and visceral in our communities, and they think that that is the legacy that they have to uphold. What we try to do is actually go inside the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center and reframe and let them know that they have a legacy of a historical legacy that traces back to the continent of Africa and throughout the entire world, particularly here in the United States of America, to show them, hey, you do have value, and that person that you don't know that may be your adversary actually has value too. So that's what the Rites of Passage sort of seeks to achieve, and I'm grateful to say that individuals such as yourself has come down and volunteered with some of our young ladies and our young people to give them the opportunity to again reimagine who they are, therefore outputting that understanding into our communities.
Well, that's wonderful. I think it is a very good program. I'm happy that you have brought something so special like this to the Juvenile Detention Center. Well, why is it important to have these type of programs at the JTDC? Again,
research. For quite some time, we've done analysis on, what makes a youth recidivize. That means that they go and get locked up. And the last thing you would think that anyone who has ever been in that type of situation would want to do is to go back into that situation. But what we found is that there was a 60% recidivism rate. That means 6 out of 10 young people would go back into the same situation. Researchers.
Well, we have a call. I'm sorry.
Sorry, no worries.
Hi, call. What's your comment or question?
Yes. Good evening. Great show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentleman next to you. I have a real quick question.
Sure.
Does he blame everything on the Caucasian people, or is there blame? Because I'm a Mexican American. I fought in Vietnam for my country.
Thank you for your
so
service.
I know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
When I was a young kid, Mexican people, Hispanic people, and African American people were proud people, very proud, and they should be.
Yes, sir.
Because we've put up with a lot, and we've come through it. But it seems today that the parents of the kids now don't want to be bothered because they want to give them that box, Xbox, and phones, stuff. They don't want to be bothered with the kids anymore. When we were growing up, our parents, our grandparents, made sure that we got a good education and everything else. But nowadays, they don't do it.
Well, thank you, caller. We're going to let our guests answer your question. And I just want to say that we're not trying to blame any race or any nationality. We're just speaking from the African Americans' perspective.
And thank you for your call.
Thank you.
But, I would like to address what the caller just said. And there are some similar sentiments in various communities, including our own. And what I say to that is we don't teach against some other culture. We're just actually including the historical account of who we are. Quite often what we found through just traditional CPS schools and or charter schools is that the history and the legacy of the greatness of people from our communities are left out or very lightly skimmed over, and they're not really developed. What we try to do is actually develop that and let people know that they come from a lineage of great leaders, great thinkers, great servants, great artists, along with the rest of the world. And they're not excluded. They are a part of this thing we call humanity. So thank you again so much for your call, and we look forward to hopefully sharing and learning from you as well.
Thank you. Well, I think we were talking about the type of programs are at the juvenile detention center and if they're really helpful to the young people that are receiving those services. Well,
Obviously, with my program, we sort of know what the expectation, the input, output that we'd like to see is. We don't know that of all the other programs. But I think I was referencing earlier that whenever culturally competent programming is involved and engaged, if you do it from a Eurocentric lens with Eurocentric children, they have a positive outlook of themselves, their communities, and they want to do positive things for themselves. The same things with Latin Americans, Native Americans. The lacking has been with culturally competent programming for African American and Black students. What we try to do is reinforce the reality that we are contributors in a positive way to our communities in many ways. So with that being said, we've seen positive inroads with the programs and the coalition members that we have in place. We have not really had the chance to investigate other programs, but we're hopeful that as we continue to grow that we'll have a positive impact on more and more youth at the facility and beyond the facility as well.
Well, part of your name is DuSable Community Coalition. Can you speak to some of those coalition programs that you are affiliated with?
But of course, yourself, Attorney Quandra Spates, is definitely one of the members of the coalition. But we work with quite a few inner city programs that are culturally competent. The 100 Black Men being one of them. Smile for Change. We have Gone Again Travel Agency, which is Crystal Dyer, and in fact we're taking a group of young marginalized inner city young people on a trip to Ghana, Africa this August.
Right.
We're going to let them not just hear who they are, but we want them to have the opportunity to experience what that looks like, and hopefully as young leaders come back to the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center and pour into the group that's behind them, and hopefully as well go into some of our local schools and share with those young people what that experience is like and how empowering and uplifting it is. I think our motto pretty much says it all. DuSable County Community Coalition. Engage, educate, and empower. Not the folks that are running stuff now, but our young people. This is our future, and if we don't invest in it, it will not return an investment to us.
Great. Well, you've been out here in the community with these young people, and you hear about all the gun violence that's permeating throughout the communities. In more cases than not, these acts of violence is unfortunately being committed by our young people. Why is that? What do you think is missing? Why are these young people, what are these young people lacking? Why are they so angry? And are they missing a voice? Do they feel like the older people aren't listening to them? I know I've asked a lot of questions, so I'm going to shut up and let you go ahead and answer my myriad of questions.
Well, Kwanzaa, if we had the magic answer to that question, I think we wouldn't need this show or any other programming that we offer. But what we do know, if we think about it critically, that there are a lack of resources. What do I mean when I say resources? We're talking educational opportunities, not just education in the traditional sense where you go in and you take an exam and you pass or fail, but education as to, wow, I am a human being, I have value, I can contribute back into our communities and reciprocate that throughout our communities. We're also looking at resources in the form of employment. I learned not to earn a Bachelor's of Arts from DePaul University in Computer Science Information Systems double major at DePaul University. I learned that by actually working in the industry and what it actually looked like, the hands-on experience. So those types of opportunities in the form of resources for our young people and not so young people are desperately needed. But if you look through the south and the west side of what we now call Chicago and Cook County, those are lacking. How do we re-engage our communities to take ownership and not wait for someone else to come in and provide those types of opportunities for ourselves? If we look at every corner store and it's not owned by somebody who lives in that community, we should ask ourselves, what does it take to own that corner store so that we can now be reinvested into our own communities?
Wow, that's great. I know we don't have the magic wand, but I would like just to hear your input on bridging the generation gap. And if we do that, do you feel like that we can save our young people by bridging that generation gap?
You know, that's an interesting question. And it's one that I find, somewhat perplexing, particularly in black communities. Because we've done that to some extent, but we have not maybe done it in a positive way. And I'll give you an example, or case in point. We often find teen pregnancy in marginalized black communities to be somewhat higher than it is throughout the rest of the population. That means that a young person is having a child, and they're literally growing up together. So the generation gap has been sort of bridged in that by that de facto reality in itself. What we have not done, however, is taken that young 16-year-old and taught them, here's some positive ways to not only raise yourself or to become more efficient as you matriculate into adulthood, but here's also some resources that we can help that child to develop and grow as well. So instead of going to the clubs together, we might have the opportunity to go to work
or school
or whatever that method is for you to do. So
okay. We actually have a caller. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I
no
don't
worries.
want to interrupt you. Yes, caller, what's your comment or question?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Pearson. Good evening, host and guest.
Good evening to you, my brother.
As we know, history repeats itself, and your focus for this session has been on the Kerner Commission report, and it identified perpetrators of that problem of the riots in the 60s. And we know that prior to 1967, the majority of your incarcerated people were white males. And they identified in the Kerner Commission report that in 10 years, the urban communities will be majority black. And that incarceration has been used as a weapon to solve that problem, which they identified as a problem. And our people are not understanding their history, and we want to reevaluate or revalue our young people so that they won't follow in the footsteps of those who came before them by being incarcerated. So what kinds of historical information are you giving the youth in these programs or who are incarcerated, along with the other education programs that you have to inform them of where they come from, who they are, and where they should not go?
Thank you so much for that question.
Yes, thank
truly
you, caller.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And to address the caller's question, we keep it real.
Yep.
We keep it in the raw. These are young people who have had life experience, so they're not, jaded by, this restraint or that restraint. We let them know, hey, look, this is a system of mass incarceration that has been perpetuated from 1619. That means that even before the Kerner report, if we do a 50-year trace prior to that report's delineation in 1968, then we'll find that, yeah, you know what? Even though mass incarceration was not the epidemic concern in the black community, we had Jim Crow, which essentially institutionalized black folk to work on plantations as sharecroppers, where they worked year after year, and at the end of the year, after the crops were harvested, owed a debt to the landowner rather than gaining a profit. So these are types of things that we try to instill in our young people, but at the same time, what is the positive impact that we can place on them as well? Hey, look, if you like video gaming, you learn to fly a drone, we get you in a drone program, therefore you can make a nice living, a comfortable life for not just yourself, but for your family and maybe some of your community members as well. So we don't just give a one-sided perspective on what we've been through. We say, wait, how do you overcome? This is something coming from the projects on the south side of Chicago that I had to myself instill and learn that, man, you know what? There's got to be another way. Creating our own is actually the key to that.
Well, great. And that actually leads me into my next question. So I know that you attend some of the court cases for some of the young people that you mentor at the Juvenile Detention Center in order to put that familiar face in front of them, in order to be an advocate in the room. Sometimes you see these young people being released, and sometimes you see them going right back into the court system. Back into the juvenile detention system. So my question to you is this real justice? And a couple of weeks ago we talked about restorative justice programs, and right now we don't see a lot of that in the juvenile detention center. We don't see any of it in the juvenile detention center. So the question is, will such programs work for our young people?
Well, obviously, I'm a strong proponent of making sure that...
Actually, we have a caller. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Go ahead, caller. What's your question or comment?
Okay. If in fact... there we go.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
What is
I'm
your
doing
question
well
or comment,
today.
caller? Thank you for calling in.
Sure. The question is, what are the top 3 asks that you have for this particular audience so that we can take some action?
Wonderful. That's the key.
Great. Thank you,
and thank you for bringing that to the point. The first is time. These are young people. If we can go and actually volunteer at the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. If you don't have time to do that, volunteer at a youth service or services organization. Be cognizant of the cultural competency component. If they see people that look like them and come from where they come from, the shield comes down a little bit more. The second thing is we have to, as a community, do what they call in the continent of Africa, Ubuntu. Back in the day, moms and dads didn't just have the responsibility for their children, they had the responsibility for every child on that block. As we come together and we watch over our children collectively and stop blaming them for everything that we see that is incorrect in their lives and uplifting them about the positive things that we do see that they can produce, then we start to reimagine who we are as a community. The last thing is inspect ourselves. Know who we are. Know what we value, and if we truly value money over our children, if we value cars over our children, if we value a position or a title over our children, then we maybe need to reassess how we're going to address youth, our future. We have to know who we are and how we have to be able to address that in a realistic manner to our young people. At the end of the day, the young people don't care about any of those things. Do you care? If you care, they can then flourish and become our future, and hopefully take care of us as we travel into older age at some point down the line.
Oh, wow. Thank you. It definitely takes a village to raise a child. I truly agree with that. So with that, did you have any wrap-up words or comments? Or?
The wrap-up is thank you, Quandra, for all the amazing work that you do and that people don't know about, but maybe one day we'll switch seats and I'll have the opportunity to talk about all the amazing, wonderful things that you provide to our young people, not just at the JTDC, but throughout our entire community. The last thing is, if you have a Facebook, you can look us up, DuSable County Community Coalition. Come out and volunteer, come out and see what we're about. Come and support our young people, because if we don't support them now, God help us all. They're coming home, and it depends on what we do now as to how they will come home. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, and actually we have to go. Our time is over. But once again, thank you. We really appreciate you all our viewers and everyone who called in today. And we hope to see you next week.